In a world where trust is a currency rarer than gold, courage is measured not by the size of your gun but by the strength to act when everyone else freezes. Life does not wait for the fearful, and the choices we make in moments of terror define the shape of our future. Some acts of bravery can spark revolutions or destroy empires. Power does not respect morality, yet even in the shadows, ethics can emerge. Those who fight for justice may walk gray paths, challenging the rules of streets, law, and the prejudices that cling to skin. In the hearts of those who bear oppression, courage can become a weapon and loyalty a shield against overwhelming odds. Sometimes the smallest voice can alter empires. One whispered warning can save a life, ignite a war, or redefine the world around you. In 2025 New York, amid racial tension and the hidden codes of black mafia families, one woman's choice would collide with destiny and change everything. Emma's hand trembled as she carried the wine bottle toward table 7 in the dimly lit Manhattan restaurant, her heart racing as she recognized the woman seated across from Dante Romano. The moment she walked through the doors, it clicked, the same face from the security footage her brother James had sent 6 months ago. The fiancée wasn't who she claimed. She was Katerina Vulov, assassin for the brat. Her pulse pounded as Katerina's hand drifted toward her purse, where a gun surely waited. Every instinct screamed that a single wrong move could end Dante Romano's life instantly. Emma had seconds to choose whether to stay silent and let the most dangerous man in New York die or risk everything to warn him. When Dante's dark eyes met hers, she bent slightly and whispered words that would change both their lives forever. Run now. Every training session, every sleepless night had led her here, to this split-second choice that could ignite chaos or salvation. 3 jobs had kept Emma alive in Manhattan while hiding from the Volkov family. She cleaned offices by day, waited tables by night, and processed data entry in her cramped Queens apartment during the late hours. Sleep was a luxury she could not afford, but neither was being discovered by the family who had murdered her brother. James Chen had been an FBI analyst who uncovered dangerous secrets. He sent her encrypted files she still didn't fully understand, but his last message had been clear: disappear and survive. For 6 months she had run, hid, and survived, all to preserve the secret he entrusted to her. Table 7 in the VIP section gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Marco, the head waiter, shoved the wine list at her and hissed, "Don't screw this up." That name, Dante Romano, sent chills down her spine. The youngest Don to control 5 families at 32, he was more powerful than men twice his age, feared even by those who whispered his name only in shadows. Emma's voice came out steadier than she felt. "You always handle VIPs." Marco reminded her the clients requested a female server. No males allowed tonight. Dante was dining with his future bride, and a big announcement was expected. Just smile, pour the wine, and fade into the background. She nodded, smoothing her black uniform and becoming invisible as she had trained. Dante Romano sat at the center table, dominating the space even while seated. His presence alone demanded attention. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble. Sharp jawline, straight nose, eyes so dark they seemed black. A tattoo peeked from his collar, a script she couldn't read, and his stillness unsettled her. While his companions laughed and talked, Dante remained motionless, observing like a predator. Emma approached, murmuring champagne first, her hands trembling. The woman beside him was stunning, blonde, draped in diamonds, hand possessively on Dante's arm, playing the perfect fiancée. Emma recognized the staged romance for what it was. She poured champagne with careful grace, starting with the fiancé when she noticed the tattoo on Katerina's inner wrist, 3 stars and a dagger. Emma's hands nearly dropped the bottle. That mark matched James's files, connecting her directly to the brat. Her mind raced as panic threatened to overwhelm her composure. Dante's deep voice cut through her fear. Controlled, dangerous, his eyes locked on hers, forcing her to steady herself. "My apologies, sir," she whispered Russian. He asked, tilting his head. "Your eyes Chinese," she admitted. "4th generation." She poured his glass, each movement measured. "Will there be anything else?" he asked, his dark gaze never leaving hers. Katerina smiled, ice in her blue eyes as she assessed Emma. "Are you making her nervous?" Dante asked. "Am I?" she replied inwardly, holding back a shiver. "What's your name?" he pressed. "Emma, sir." "How long have you worked here?" he inquired, testing her, tasting her response like fine wine. "For months," she said, heart hammering. Emma retreated to the side, refilling water glasses and clearing plates while her mind calculated the odds. If she warned Dante and was wrong, he might kill her. If she stayed silent and he died, she would carry that guilt forever. If Katerina succeeded, New York could descend into a brutal gang war. Marco appeared at her elbow. "Table 7 wants the wine you recommended. Mr. Romano specifically requested it." Emma retrieved the Barolo from the cellar, hands shaking violently. Katerina had checked her phone multiple times. Emma knew a signal had been sent, and an assassination could be imminent. As she approached the table, Dante's eyes tracked her movements, dark, calculating, patient. He had been observing her discreetly all night, unseen yet unmistakable. Presenting the bottle, she heard his quiet command, "Open it." Katerina excused herself, heading to the ladies' room. "Don't finish dessert without me," she said, leaving Emma's heart in her throat. Emma realized the woman was creating an alibi while someone else moved to strike. The pop of the cork was a heartbeat of impending danger. She poured a tasting portion into Dante's glass, and his eyes never left hers. He swirled, inhaled, sipped. "Perfect," he murmured, suggesting she step back and remain safe. The tension in the room was palpable. Emma's mind raced, calculating escape routes, potential firefights, and the lethal consequences of a wrong move. Dante had survived to 32 by trusting instincts. Every fiber of his being screamed that Emma was telling the truth. He moved in fluid motion, hand reaching for the weapon at his back. Luca and Marco materialized from their posts, confusion on their faces but weapons drawn. Dante grabbed Emma's wrist, pulling her behind him, shielding her as gunfire erupted. Screams filled the restaurant, chaos breaking out with terrifying precision. Emma clung to Dante as shots shattered glass, diners diving to the floor, 3 shooters coordinated, professional. Dante reacted with deadly efficiency, taking cover and returning fire. His bodyguards protected her while he neutralized the immediate threat, moving her toward the wine cellar entrance. Inside the dark, cool cellar lined with bottles worth more than most apartments. Dante pulled out his phone, calling his second-in-command, Salvatore. "Location compromised. Bradford, send the detail. Lock down the penthouse." His voice was firm, unyielding. Emma pressed against the racks, breathing heavily, mascara smudged, uniform torn. She had just saved a Mafia boss's life, and now she was part of his world, whether she liked it or not. Dante acknowledged her bravery, every glance a mixture of calculation and appreciation. The Volkov family had killed her brother, but Dante Romano was not her enemy, and yet her choices now intertwined their fates irrevocably. Emma felt her pulse hammering against her ribs, every breath a reminder that survival was more than instinct, it was choice. The dim light of the cellar cast shadows across Dante's face, revealing lines she hadn't noticed before, scars etched by battles she could only imagine. Her fingers trembled as she clutched a bottle for balance, yet Dante's gaze held steady, almost forgiving. In that moment, Emma understood that courage was not absence of fear but the refusal to be paralyzed by it. Every second counted, and every choice was a reflection of her character. The distant echo of sirens reminded her that the world outside continued its indifferent chaos. Life moved forward, whether one survived or not. She had carried the weight of her brother's death, but now she carried the responsibility of someone else's life. Dante's hand. It burned through her conscience like fire. Dante's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, guiding her through the maze of bottles. He didn't speak, but his silence was loaded with expectation. Trust was not given freely in his world, only earned through action. Emma realized that in this darkness, every gesture, every glance was a test of loyalty. Her mind flashed back to James' last message: disappear and survive. Survive. That word had always sounded simple, almost comforting, but now it tasted bitter. Survival meant more than running. It meant navigating a labyrinth of moral compromises, weighing lives against lives, choices against consequences. The cellar door creaked behind them, and Emma's stomach twisted. Footsteps approached fast, determined. She held her breath, counting silently, praying that Dante's instincts would guide them. Fear sharpened her senses, but it also reminded her that life demanded courage even when the odds were insurmountable. Dante crouched low, scanning shadows, calculating movements, every muscle poised for violence. Emma's heart beat in tandem with his, realizing that strength was not in muscle alone but in the clarity of thought under pressure. The quiet intensity of a trained mind could shape outcomes more than brute force ever could. She stumbled slightly, and Dante caught her without a word. His grip was firm, not restraining but protective, and she felt a strange sense of relief. Life was fragile, she thought, and in fragile moments, connections became anchors. Courage and trust intertwined, fragile yet unbreakable in the storm of violence. Footsteps drew nearer, punctuated by muffled voices speaking a language Emma didn't fully understand. She felt the adrenaline sharpen every nerve. The familiar chill of danger ignited an instinctual clarity. One wrong decision now could end everything, but the weight of inaction felt heavier still. Dante's whisper was calm, almost philosophical. Choices define us more than outcomes. Emma's thoughts raced. Her brother had died because of choices, and here she was, living in the consequence of decisions she hadn't even made yet. The moral compass of life often pointed in directions society feared to tread. She peeked around a shelf, spotting movement. 3 figures, masked, armed. Precision and intent marked every step they took. Emma realized life was often a series of calculated risks disguised as chance encounters. Survival demanded analysis, courage, and the willingness to bear moral weight. Dante moved silently, each step a testament to disciplined training and instinct. Emma followed, heart thundering, aware that her own instincts were still raw, untested in this crucible of danger. Fear and clarity coexisted, teaching her that panic was the enemy of wisdom. One shooter paused, glancing toward the faint light of the cellar. Emma's hand froze, trembling. Dante's eyes locked on hers, conveying without words that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it. Philosophies were no longer abstractions. They were survival tools. Gunfire erupted, sharp and deafening. Emma's body pressed against the wall as bullets shattered wood and glass. Her heart skipped, then steadied in chaos. She realized that life's meaning often emerged in the most dangerous moments, where instinct, morality, and courage collided. Dante's precision was terrifying yet graceful. He neutralized one assailant with cold efficiency while Emma ducked behind the racks, gripping her own shaking hands. Violence was a reflection of the world's harsh logic, but even within it, ethical choices could shape the path forward. The second shooter hesitated, and Emma understood hesitation was life itself reflected in microseconds. Every decision carried the weight of mortality, and in that liminal space, she sensed the fragile beauty of existence. Choices defined identity more than survival alone. Dante signaled for her to move, his fingers brushing hers with almost imperceptible gentleness. Emma felt a strange intimacy in the moment, understanding that trust, even in fleeting seconds, could be more profound than words. Life demanded connection, even amidst danger. They rounded a corner, and she glimpsed the final assailant. Time slowed, and Emma's mind catalogued escape routes, potential risks, and the moral implications of action. Philosophy and pragmatism merged. Sometimes morality demanded risk, and courage demanded thought. Dante's hand pressed hers against a bottle as he fired, a perfect shot ending the threat. Emma exhaled, her body trembling from relief and residual adrenaline. Survival was a negotiation with fate, and courage was the currency with which life was bought. Silence descended. Only the echo of distant sirens remained. Emma's gaze met Dante's, and she realized that even in darkness one could find clarity. The human spirit was resilient, capable of forging morality in the midst of violence and fear. She remembered her brother's warnings, but in this moment, she also felt the potential for agency, for choosing action over submission. Life demanded responsibility and survival demanded courage, not the absence of fear but the willingness to engage it fully. Dante assessed the scene, methodical and unshaken. Emma felt awe mixed with fear. Power and morality were intertwined. He seemed to say without words, and she understood that ethical action required strength and decisiveness. A faint smile touched Dante's lips, almost imperceptible. Emma wondered if he recognized her internal struggle, the same moral reckoning he carried every day. Life often presented ethical paradoxes disguised as survival scenarios, and how one responded revealed character more than circumstance. Footsteps in the distance suggested reinforcements. Emma's body tightened, aware that peace was temporary and vigilance eternal. The world offered no guarantees, only the opportunity to act, to exercise courage, and to uphold principles under duress. Dante guided her toward a hidden stairwell. Each step was measured, cautious. Emma thought about the fragility of life, how fleeting moments could carry infinite consequences, and how moral integrity often demanded choices that terrified the soul. Her mind wandered to James, imagining his analytical mind mapping escape routes from afar. Survival was more than evasion. It was understanding the consequences of every decision and maintaining a moral compass amidst chaos. Emma felt the tension in her body, realizing that fear sharpened awareness but also revealed character. Life's philosophy was written not in books but in moments like this, where instinct, morality, and courage intertwined. They reached the top of the stairwell. The city's night air spilled into their senses. Emma inhaled, realizing that even in survival, freedom and moral choice were inseparable. One's actions defined not only survival but identity. Dante glanced at her, eyes shadowed but intense. Trust was extended, not granted. Emma felt the weight of their shared experience, understanding that human connection and moral courage were intertwined, even amidst violence. As they stepped into the alley, sirens growing louder, Emma felt a strange exhilaration. Survival was temporary, life was fragile, and yet the exercise of courage and moral choice gave meaning to existence, illuminating the path forward even in darkness. Emma's legs ached as they moved through the narrow alley, each step echoing against the walls. Fear was a constant companion, yet she felt it sharpen her senses, revealing the thin line between caution and paralysis. Courage was choosing action when the body screamed to flee. The shadows twisted in the streetlights, forming shapes that seemed almost alive. Emma's mind raced with possibilities, imagining every angle of attack. Life, she realized, was often a negotiation with the unseen, a balance between preparedness and trust and instinct. Dante's hand brushed hers briefly, a silent affirmation that they were tethered in mutual reliance. Connection, she thought, was as vital as strategy. Survival without trust was merely prolonging existence, not truly living. A sudden clatter behind them made her jump, heart hammering. Emma understood that danger was rarely announced with courtesy, and the mind must always anticipate the unpredictable. Wisdom lay in the preparedness to act decisively without hesitation. Dante's eyes scanned the horizon, calculating distances, angles, and risks with a precision that both comforted and intimidated her. Life often demanded this kind of vigilance, where ethical and practical choices collided in split seconds. She swallowed hard, considering their options. Escape, confrontation, or hiding. Each path carried consequences. Some irreversible. Emma felt the weight of responsibility, knowing every decision now bore the potential to define her moral and personal identity. A figure emerged from the mist, masked and armed. Emma froze, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear but the willingness to act in spite of it, a philosophy that life continually demanded. Dante signaled for her to follow silently. Emma's heart pounded with anticipation and dread. Every movement was laden with meaning. Each step forward was both a challenge to fate and an assertion of agency. The attacker's shadow loomed large as they approached. Emma's mind raced, analyzing escape routes and potential threats. Life often presented itself as a series of calculated risks, where inaction was as consequential as action. Dante moved like a shadow, silent, efficient, and deadly. Emma followed, understanding that in moments of crisis, morality and instinct must coexist. Ethical action required courage, and courage demanded clarity of mind. Gunshots rang out suddenly, jagged and loud. Emma's body hit the ground instinctively, yet her mind remained alert. She realized that life's most profound lessons often came wrapped in moments of sheer terror, teaching clarity, resilience, and moral fortitude. Dante neutralized the threat with terrifying precision, and Emma felt a mix of awe and fear. Power and morality intertwined in such moments, reminding her that strength without purpose was empty, and ethics without courage were impotent. Silence followed, broken only by distant sirens and the wind weaving through the alley. Emma's thoughts swirled. Life was fragile, unpredictable, yet every conscious choice carried meaning. Courage was the measure of human value amidst chaos. Dante's gaze met hers, steady and unyielding. Emma understood that trust, earned in moments of danger, was more profound than any spoken vow. Survival intertwined with moral choice, shaping identity in ways subtle, yet irreversible. Her body trembled, adrenaline still surging, but a strange calm settled over her mind. Emma realized that resilience was as much internal as it was physical, a discipline of thought and spirit cultivated under pressure. The city around them was alive, indifferent yet vivid. Emma felt the paradox of existence. Humans carved purpose and meaning in a world that often offered none. Survival demanded presence, morality demanded courage, and both required mindfulness. Footsteps echoed, faint but deliberate, signaling that danger had not passed. Emma felt a tense awareness settle over her. Life, she thought, was a series of challenges that tested not only skill but ethical resolve and emotional endurance. Dante led her into a narrow side street, assessing every shadow, every sound. Emma reflected that moral clarity often came through experience, through confronting fear and witnessing the consequences of action and inaction. A sudden shout split the night, and Emma's pulse spiked. Danger was immediate and relentless, yet she felt a strange exhilaration. Survival demanded focus, yes, but also acceptance of mortality and the weight of ethical responsibility. Dante glanced at her, eyes questioning and approving simultaneously. Emma felt a connection beyond words, a mutual understanding that life's trials were not only physical but philosophical. Courage, morality, and trust were inseparable in the crucible of existence. They ducked behind a dumpster as footsteps grew closer. Emma's mind catalogued escape routes, probabilities, and potential outcomes. She realized that fear sharpened judgment, and that moral choice often demanded engagement with the unknown, not avoidance. A flicker of movement in the shadows sent Emma's heart racing. She acknowledged that life's meaning often emerged in these intense, fleeting moments where instinct, intellect, and ethics collided. Action was a reflection of identity. Dante's voice was a whisper. Every decision defines us. Emma nodded internally. She understood that survival was not only physical but a test of character, that courage and morality were currencies of existence in a chaotic world. Gunfire erupted again, and Emma hit the ground, shaking but alert. She realized that life's lessons were brutal yet clear. Clarity under pressure, decisiveness, and ethical integrity were tools that could shape outcomes, perhaps even fate itself. Dante dispatched the threat with fluid efficiency. Emma's chest heaved with relief, and yet she felt the tension persist. True courage, she realized, was not momentary heroism but sustained vigilance and moral awareness amidst persistent danger. The alley grew quieter, but Emma's senses remained sharp. Life demanded mindfulness, she understood, not just for survival but for the preservation of humanity in moments that threatened to strip it away. Dante's hand guided her toward a safer route, steady and confident. Emma felt the fragile bond of trust solidify. She recognized that moral courage and empathy were essential even in a world defined by violence, shaping not only survival but the soul. A distant alarm reminded her that they were still within a hostile environment. Emma felt both fear and resolve, understanding that existence required negotiation with risk and constant engagement with one's values. They paused briefly to catch their breath. Emma's mind reflected on the paradox of human life, the coexistence of fragility and resilience, fear and courage, morality and necessity. Each choice, she realized, was a philosophical act. Dante's gaze swept the surroundings, calculating, analyzing, ethical in intent, though ruthless in method. Emma admired the balance, recognizing that survival often required integrating intellect, moral consideration, and fearless action seamlessly. She inhaled the night air, feeling alive in the most primal sense yet conscious of the profound responsibility that came with each decision. Emma acknowledged that life's essence was distilled in moments like these, where survival and morality were inseparable. The distant hum of the city contrasted sharply with the intensity of their situation. Emma felt a strange serenity amidst chaos, understanding that clarity, courage, and ethical awareness were gifts earned only in confrontation with danger and self. They continued down the alley, footsteps measured, minds alert. Emma reflected that existence demanded continuous moral engagement, courage tempered by wisdom, and the acceptance that choices once made echo far beyond the immediate moment. A narrow corridor stretched before them, dimly lit, walls close enough to feel the tension pressing in from every side. Emma's heartbeat synced with each step, a reminder that life's fragility made every decision sacred. Dante moved with deliberate calm, but Emma sensed the storm of calculation behind his eyes. She realized that control over one's fear was as vital as physical skill. Panic could be as lethal as the enemy. A sudden creak above made her glance upward, muscles tensing. Every noise carried weight, each shadow suggested possibility. Life, she thought, was a relentless teacher demanding attention, patience, and moral awareness in every moment. Dante's whisper instructed her to stay low. Emma obeyed, understanding that survival required both humility and the courage to defer instinct when reason dictated. Ethical choice often meant restraint, even in desperation. The air smelled of smoke and damp concrete. Emma felt a pang of anxiety, but also clarity. In crisis, the mind distilled priorities, safety, action, and the moral responsibility to protect oneself and others. Footsteps echoed closer. She pressed against the wall, heart pounding, aware that time was elastic in moments of threat. Every second was a crucible, forcing clarity and moral reckoning simultaneously. Dante's gaze never wavered from the approaching figure. Emma realized that vigilance required not just perception but understanding the motives and vulnerabilities of those around you. Wisdom often revealed itself under pressure. A glint of metal caught the dim light, and Emma's stomach clenched. Violence, she understood, was a persistent shadow over human interaction, demanding both courage to confront it and mindfulness to navigate its consequences. She reflected that fear was not weakness but a compass, directing attention and choice. True courage lay in listening to fear without succumbing, in acting ethically even when panic demanded otherwise. Dante's hand brushed her shoulder, subtle yet grounding. Emma felt a connection deeper than words, forged through shared danger and the tacit understanding that morality and courage were intertwined in the crucible of survival. A shout from the darkness made them both freeze. Emma's mind raced, calculating angles, paths, and risks. Life often thrust moral dilemmas into impossible situations, forcing action even when outcomes were uncertain. Dante's eyes flicked to her briefly, a silent question. Emma nodded, trusting that shared judgment could amplify moral clarity under threat. Ethical action, she realized, was strengthened by partnership and empathy. The figure emerged, face obscured, movements predatory. Emma's pulse surged. She recognized that life was a series of confrontations, each demanding both physical and ethical agility, a balance of instinct and conscience. A sudden movement to their left startled her, heart hammering. Emma reflected that existence was defined by unpredictability, and moral courage was the act of maintaining integrity despite chaos. Dante gestured forward, and they advanced, low and silent. Emma felt the paradox of courage. To act decisively, one must confront fear while preserving empathy, awareness, and ethical consideration in each choice. The corridor widened, revealing more shadows. Emma's mind catalogued every possible threat and opportunity. Life, she understood, was a matrix of risk, morality, and action, where inattention could erase all previous preparation. A sharp noise behind them triggered a reflexive duck. Emma recognized that survival demanded both instinct and reflection. Awareness without moral discernment was hollow, just as morality without action was inert. Dante's whisper reminded her to move quickly. Emma's muscles obeyed, but her mind remained active. She realized that courage was a conversation between body and conscience, each guiding the other through uncertainty. A flash of movement ahead made her gasp. Emma considered that life's essence often lay in moments when instinct, intellect, and moral judgment collided, revealing both vulnerability and resilience. The shadows seemed to twist unnaturally. Emma felt a cold shiver of realization. Fear sharpened perception, but clarity required discernment. Ethical action demanded calm even under extreme duress. Dante's hand brushed her back, guiding her silently. Emma appreciated that human connection fortified moral courage, reminding her that even in violence, empathy and trust were instruments of survival. A sudden bang reverberated, throwing them both off balance. Emma acknowledged that life's lessons often arrived violently, demanding rapid adaptation, ethical judgment, and the courage to act decisively in uncertainty. The corridor split ahead, forcing a choice. Emma hesitated, aware that every decision carried potential for harm or salvation. She reflected that morality was not abstract but enacted in these small, critical choices under pressure. Dante's gaze met hers, steady and urgent. Emma felt the weight of responsibility, understanding that ethical courage required not only action but mental resilience and the awareness of consequences. A figure lurked at the corner, and Emma's stomach tightened. She realized that life's challenges often expose the deepest truths about oneself: fear, empathy, decisiveness, and moral clarity all intertwined. They moved in unison, shadows within shadows. Emma felt the paradox of human existence, that true bravery was not absence of fear, but action guided by conscience amidst danger. A muffled sound behind them reminded Emma that safety was never guaranteed. She considered that every step carried moral and existential weight, that survival demanded attention to both ethics and skill. Dante's whisper instructed a pause. Emma's chest heaved, adrenaline raw. She understood that stillness in chaos was not cowardice but strategic, ethical, and reflective of rare courage to observe before acting. A distant light flickered, signaling a possible exit. Emma felt a surge of hope tempered by caution. Life's lessons had taught her that optimism must be balanced by vigilance, and moral choice by prudence. The shadows shifted unnaturally as they moved. Emma acknowledged the strange exhilaration of surviving terror, the intimate knowledge that courage, ethics, and intellect were inseparable allies in human life. Dante's hand guided her toward a narrow doorway. Emma's mind raced, cataloging escape routes and potential threats. She understood that life required constant negotiation between instinct, morality, and deliberate action. A sudden noise made them freeze, and Emma's pulse surged. She realized that fear was a mirror, reflecting both vulnerability and strength, and moral courage was the discipline to act rightly despite that fear. The corridor opened to a faintly lit street. Emma exhaled, a mix of relief and vigilance. She reflected that existence was defined by moments of confrontation with mortality, each shaping character, resilience, and ethical awareness in profound ways. They stepped onto the street, shadows stretching long under the flickering lamps. Emma's body ached with tension, yet her mind was alert, noting each sound and movement. Life, she realized, demanded presence, and moral courage meant staying aware even when exhausted. Dante scanned the surroundings, every muscle coiled. Emma recognized that vigilance was not mere survival instinct but an ethical responsibility, a promise to herself and others that she would act rightly when faced with danger. A sudden screech of tires made them duck. Emma's heart raced as adrenaline sharpened her perception. She reflected that life's chaos tested both instinct and moral compass, forcing alignment of thought, action, and conscience under pressure. Dante's hand on her shoulder reminded her that connection and trust amplified courage. She felt that ethical awareness was intertwined with empathy. Even in peril, humanity guided choice and tempered reaction. They moved cautiously past an abandoned car, the metallic scent of danger lingering. Emma considered that life required constant judgment, where ethical action and survival were inseparable, each influencing the other in unseen ways. A distant shout echoed, and Emma flinched. Fear surged, but clarity followed. True courage was measured not by absence of fear but by thoughtful action guided by conscience, intellect, and intuition. Dante signaled a turn, and they obeyed silently. Emma understood that timing and observation were moral decisions as much as tactical ones. To act recklessly could harm themselves or others, a failure of both prudence and principle. The street twisted, dark alleys, beckoning threats. Emma noted every detail, realizing that life's unpredictability demanded adaptability, courage, and the discipline to remain ethically grounded even when survival instinct screamed otherwise. A sudden figure emerged, masked and deliberate. Emma's breath caught, but she maintained composure. She reflected that life often forced confrontation with darkness, revealing inner truths about bravery, morality, and human resilience. Dante whispered a warning, and Emma froze. She felt that ethical action sometimes required patience, restraint, and the humility to let reason guide instinct, a balance she had learned through every prior struggle. The masked figure advanced, steps measured. Emma's mind catalogued escape options, weighing risk against necessity. Moral courage, she realized, was the ability to act decisively without succumbing to anger or fear, maintaining dignity amidst danger. They ducked behind a dumpster, pressed close. Emma considered that moments of fear distilled essence of character. Each choice illuminated values and revealed whether courage and morality could coexist under pressure. Dante's gaze met hers briefly, silently assessing readiness. Emma reflected that trust was a moral contract, a bond that allowed coordinated action and reinforced ethical decision-making even when terror threatened to fragment resolve. A flash of light startled them, exposing fleeting details of the surroundings. Emma's mind catalogued every shadow, every sound. She recognized that life's uncertainties demanded mindfulness, attention, and deliberate ethical choices in every fleeting second. They moved quickly, shadows within shadows. Emma realized that courage was not spontaneous heroism but deliberate alignment of instinct, intellect, and moral conscience in the face of relentless unpredictability. The sound of running footsteps echoed behind them. Emma's pulse quickened, but clarity emerged. Ethical courage required presence of mind, rapid assessment, and compassion, even when self-preservation instinct competed with morality. Dante gestured toward a narrow passageway. Emma's thoughts raced, considering risk and moral responsibility. Survival required awareness, but ethical action demanded restraint and careful judgment, ensuring choices preserved life and integrity. A sudden noise made them duck instinctively. Emma's heart thundered, yet she realized fear sharpened perception. True courage was not absence of fear, but the ability to act rightly despite it, harmonizing instinct with conscience. They crept forward, the passage narrowing. Emma reflected that human existence was often a sequence of crises, each offering opportunity to exercise moral courage, resilience, and insight into the fragile yet profound value of life. Dante's hand guided her silently through the darkness. Emma understood that guidance and shared trust created ethical frameworks, allowing action under uncertainty without sacrificing integrity or compassion. A distant light flickered at the end of the corridor. Emma's chest tightened with hope and caution. Life, she mused, was an intricate interplay of timing, ethics, and survival instincts, where judgment and courage shaped outcomes more than brute strength. A shadow moved across their path. Emma's awareness heightened. She realized that observation itself was an ethical act, a commitment to understanding the environment fully before making consequential choices. Dante signaled a halt, and they froze. Emma reflected that patience in crisis was an expression of moral and intellectual maturity. Impulsive action could compromise both survival and ethical principles. The alley opened into a wider street. Emma's steps were measured, deliberate. She considered that even small acts of composure, attention, and ethical decision-making rippled outward, influencing lives beyond immediate perception. A figure appeared at the far end, and tension surged. Emma's fear was raw, but her mind remained deliberate. Life's most profound lessons often arrived in high-pressure moments where moral courage was inseparable from survival. Dante's gaze was unwavering. Emma noted that shared focus and trust created a moral synergy, where decisions were sharpened and guided by mutual responsibility and ethical awareness. A sudden shout shattered the stillness. Emma ducked instinctively, recognizing that unpredictability demanded continuous ethical and tactical assessment, ensuring that action honored both survival and conscience. They moved toward the nearest cover. Emma's thoughts raced, analyzing options and outcomes. She realized that life required constant vigilance, but moral courage demanded intentionality in every decision, balancing instinct with principle. The streetlight flickered, casting fleeting shadows. Emma felt the paradox of existence. Fear illuminated clarity, and danger tested the ability to act ethically, proving that courage and conscience were inseparable under duress. Dante whispered directions, guiding her through the maze. Emma reflected that guidance and trust were moral imperatives. A recognition that cooperation under stress enhanced survival and reinforced ethical integrity. A distant siren warned of approaching danger. Emma's pulse surged, but she understood that ethical courage demanded attention, decisiveness, and calm reasoning, even when the body screamed panic. They reached the edge of the street. Emma exhaled, realizing that every step, every choice had been a negotiation of instinct, morality, and intellect. Life, she concluded, was a crucible that tested courage, resilience, and ethical awareness continuously. They paused at the corner, shadows swallowing the narrow street. Emma felt the weight of anticipation pressing against her chest, understanding that fear was both a teacher and a test of character, demanding clarity of thought and steadfastness of moral resolve. Dante scanned the surroundings, every detail etched sharply in his mind. Emma realized that true courage was not merely reacting to danger but anticipating consequences, aligning action with ethics even when uncertainty prevailed. A low rumble of footsteps approached from behind. Emma's pulse quickened, but she steadied her breath. Life, she reflected, often presented ethical dilemmas in the form of survival choices, where instinct and conscience must negotiate silently, yet decisively. Dante gestured forward, and Emma obeyed, aware that timing and observation were as much moral acts as tactical decisions, shaping outcomes for themselves and potentially for others in unseen ways. The street narrowed, litter scattered under flickering lights. Emma's senses heightened. She recognized that adversity illuminated character, revealing whether courage could coexist with ethical reflection under relentless pressure. A shadow shifted across the pavement, and Emma froze. She understood that presence of mind was a moral responsibility, a silent promise to act rightly even in the throes of fear and uncertainty. Dante's hand brushed hers, anchoring calmness. Emma considered that human connection, even brief and utilitarian, reinforced moral choices, transforming instinctive reactions into deliberate, ethically guided action. They ducked behind a stack of crates, pressed close. Emma reflected that survival required vigilance, but moral courage required restraint and discernment, balancing immediate impulse with long-term ethical consequences. A distant yell echoed, raising tension like static electricity. Emma's heart raced, yet she found clarity. True bravery emerged when fear was acknowledged but consciously guided by moral reasoning and thoughtful judgment. The narrow passage opened to an abandoned courtyard. Emma stepped lightly, every motion deliberate. She realized that life's unpredictability demanded not just courage but the ethical framing of each decision in relation to oneself and others. Dante's eyes scanned the periphery. Emma recognized that trust was a moral contract, a silent agreement that coordinated action required integrity and mutual ethical commitment under high-pressure conditions. A sudden gust of wind sent debris skittering across the ground. Emma's pulse spiked, yet she reflected that chaos often clarified values, revealing the distinction between reactive impulses and considered, morally grounded choices. They moved past a shattered doorway, shadows deepening. Emma noted that every step tested composure and principle, showing that courage alone was insufficient without ethical awareness guiding action in critical moments. Dante whispered a warning, and Emma froze instinctively. She understood that restraint was a moral strength, the capacity to wait, observe, and choose correctly even when fear or adrenaline tempted reckless behavior. A figure emerged from the darkness, masked and deliberate. Emma's breath caught, yet she maintained focus. Life, she realized, often revealed its lessons in the tension between danger and ethical action, each decision a reflection of character. Dante's hand guided her past the threat. Emma considered that mentorship, guidance, and shared moral vigilance were as vital as courage, transforming fear into disciplined action rooted in integrity. The street twisted unexpectedly, leading into a shadowed corridor. Emma's mind catalogued threats and opportunities alike. She recognized that moral courage demanded awareness, adaptability, and commitment to acting rightly despite uncertainty. A sudden clatter behind them caused Emma to flinch. She steadied herself, noting that presence and ethical clarity were intertwined. The ability to respond thoughtfully to danger was as much a moral choice as a survival tactic. They crouched behind a rusted vehicle, breathing shallow. Emma realized that fear amplified awareness, sharpening perception, and forcing alignment of instinct with deliberate ethical reasoning in real time. Dante signaled a path, and Emma followed, conscious that collaboration under pressure demanded trust, shared moral responsibility, and precise judgment to maintain both safety and integrity. The alley opened slightly, revealing a dimly lit street beyond. Emma's chest tightened with cautious hope, reflecting that life's unpredictability required patience, strategic thought, and ethical steadfastness in every step forward. A sudden shout from the far end fractured silence. Emma ducked instinctively, yet her mind catalogued responses. She understood that unpredictability tested not just courage but the discipline to act morally. Even when survival instinct urged rash behavior, they edged forward, shadows clinging to them like velvet. Emma realized that courage was often quiet, measured, and morally framed, demanding restraint and strategic reflection amidst chaos and danger. Dante's eyes flicked to a side passage, assessing risk. Emma noted that ethical courage required continual evaluation, weighing potential harm against necessity, balancing immediate action with long-term consequences. A faint glimmer of light flickered ahead, casting partial clarity. Emma's pulse surged, yet insight emerged. Fear revealed both vulnerability and opportunity, urging action that honored both survival and moral conscience. They crept toward a narrow doorway, movements synchronized. Emma reflected that alignment of trust, focus, and ethical reasoning created resilience, transforming trepidation into disciplined, principled courage under duress. A low rumble indicated approaching danger. Emma's body tensed, but mental clarity prevailed. Life, she thought, demanded that every choice, every motion, reflected a deliberate negotiation between instinct, intellect, and morality. Dante gestured sharply, signaling concealment. Emma recognized that restraint was not weakness but moral fortitude, the ability to delay reaction to ensure action remained ethically sound and strategically effective. The streetlight above flickered again. Emma's mind catalogued shadows, sounds, and potential threats. She realized that awareness itself was an ethical act, a responsibility to oneself and others to act rightly even in precarious circumstances. They advanced cautiously, finally reaching the far end of the alley. Emma exhaled slowly, aware that each heartbeat, each careful decision, had been a crucible for both courage and ethical reflection, proving that life's trials forged character in moments of tension and choice. A faint scent of rain and dust hung in the air, mingling with Emma's awareness that every step carried moral weight, each decision rippling outward like stones tossed into unseen waters. Dante's movements were precise, measured, as if every muscle understood the calculus of danger and ethics. Emma reflected that discipline was more than survival. It was a commitment to act rightly, even when outcomes were uncertain. A distant shout rang out, jagged and urgent. Emma froze, heart hammering, realizing that fear exposed both vulnerability and strength, urging moral clarity amidst instinctual chaos. They pressed against a crumbling wall, shadows their only allies. Emma understood that courage was refined in such moments, tempered by reflection and the recognition that right action was always preferable to mere impulse. Dante's eyes scanned every corner, calculating, predicting. Emma thought that true bravery required not just strength but moral alignment, a conscious choice to act with integrity under relentless pressure. A sudden gust rattled loose debris across the street. Emma flinched yet remained composed, aware that chaos often illuminated character, revealing the interplay between instinct, reason, and ethical resolve. They moved cautiously past a shattered window, glass glinting under dim light. Emma realized that patience and foresight were moral acts, framing each decision in context and principle. A shadow shifted unexpectedly. Emma's pulse raced, yet she reminded herself that restraint in moments of danger was an ethical strength, not a weakness, a deliberate negotiation between fear and action. Dante signaled silently, urging forward. Emma considered that collaboration under duress was as much moral as tactical, requiring trust, attentiveness, and shared commitment to integrity. The narrow corridor widened slightly, revealing traces of past lives and abandoned hope. Emma reflected that life's challenges were mirrors, forcing confrontation with both fear and conscience. A low, ominous hum vibrated through the walls. Emma's senses sharpened, recognizing that vigilance itself was ethical, the responsibility to observe, interpret, and act rightly in uncertainty. They edged forward, shadows clinging tightly. Emma understood that courage often demanded quiet perseverance, a moral discipline that transcended mere survival instinct. Dante paused, assessing a potential threat. Emma noted that deliberation, ethical reflection, and courage were inseparable, forming a triad guiding every decision under pressure. A sudden clatter to their left caused Emma to duck instinctively. She reminded herself that moral courage meant choosing deliberate action, resisting reactive impulses that could compromise safety or integrity. They pressed onward, aware of the shifting tension in the alley. Emma recognized that danger was a teacher, revealing the depth of one's principles and the discipline required to align action with moral reasoning. Dante's glance met hers, a silent affirmation of trust and shared responsibility. Emma realized that mutual ethical vigilance strengthened both action and resolve, making them capable of more than fear alone allowed. A flicker of movement in the distance tightened Emma's chest. She reminded herself that fear was inevitable, but the choice to act deliberately and ethically remained hers. They skirted past a rusted doorway, senses heightened. Emma reflected that awareness and moral clarity were inseparable. The courage to observe was the courage to act rightly when the moment demanded. A sudden rumble echoed from the far street. Emma flinched but controlled her reactions, understanding that courage was guided by foresight, patience, and ethical reasoning, not just reflex. Dante's hand brushed hers in silent reassurance. Emma considered that human connection could anchor morality, transforming instinctive fear into considered, principled action. The alley bent unexpectedly, leading them into deeper shadows. Emma's mind catalogued every risk, every possibility, recognizing that ethical courage required attentiveness, balance, and integrity under stress. A distant shout fractured the stillness, jagged and uncertain. Emma ducked instinctively, but mental clarity guided her. Life's challenges, she thought, were ethical tests, as much as physical, demanding deliberate choices in chaotic circumstances. They moved slowly, deliberate as predators and philosophers combined. Emma recognized that courage intertwined with morality. Each action reflected character. Each choice defined her under pressure. Dante signaled a slight shift in direction. Emma understood that adaptation was moral as well as tactical, the ability to revise action while remaining ethically grounded. A faint glimmer of light reflected off puddles ahead. Emma's pulse quickened, yet clarity prevailed. Danger revealed principle, fear demanded reflection, and courage required conscious, ethically guided decisions. They pressed forward, hearts synchronized with tension and purpose. Emma reflected that survival was insufficient without moral reflection, that character was forged in how one acted under pressure, not merely how one endured. A loose piece of metal clanged underfoot, echoing sharply. Emma's heart raced, yet she reminded herself that ethical courage required calmness, foresight, and deliberate choice even amid chaos. They reached a narrow opening, a potential path forward. Emma exhaled slowly, realizing that each careful step was a convergence of courage, trust, and moral clarity, defining her not only in the present but in the principles that would guide all future choices. The opening led them into a narrow service tunnel dimly lit by flickering bulbs. Emma's breath sharpened the stale air, realizing that fear and clarity often walked hand in hand. Dante's eyes darted to every shadow, muscles coiled for any sign of threat. And Emma understood that vigilance was not merely survival, it was an ethical obligation to protect life under uncertainty. A distant echo of footsteps made her heart pound, yet she reminded herself that courage was acting rightly even when panic clawed at every nerve. The walls bore years of forgotten history, graffiti and decay marking their passage. Emma reflected that life left traces, just as every choice left moral imprints, guiding action in unseen ways. Dante moved with an almost predatory grace, and Emma realized that discipline was as much moral as it was tactical. Restraint and calculated movement preserved life and integrity. A sudden metallic clang made Emma flinch. She inhaled sharply, understanding that even in chaos, clarity and ethical reasoning created the path forward. They paused near a corner, each shadow a potential threat. Emma felt the weight of responsibility. Action without reflection risked more than harm. It risked compromise of principle. Dante's hand brushed hers in silent reassurance. She understood that trust in others was both a tactical necessity and a moral affirmation, a recognition that courage could be shared. A distant murmur drifted through the tunnel. Emma's mind raced, yet she remembered that deliberate observation and patience were essential, that moral courage required thinking before acting. Every step echoed with purpose. Emma considered that life's trials were tests of both action and conscience, that bravery without reflection was mere recklessness. A faint scuff ahead made her tense. She understood that even small signs demanded attention, that integrity often revealed itself in the smallest, most precise decisions. Dante's eyes scanned the darkness, unwavering. Emma realized that moral clarity and tactical skill were inseparable. Courage guided by principle could survive chaos. A sudden shift of air made her shiver. Emma reflected that fear was inevitable, but the choice to act ethically, to protect and preserve, defined true courage. They moved past debris-strewn corners, silent but alert. Emma noted that mindfulness in danger was a moral act, an acknowledgement of responsibility for every step and every choice. The tunnel narrowed further, pressing them close together. Emma's pulse raced, yet she remembered that moral courage required composure even when instinct screamed otherwise. A faint scrape echoed from behind. She tightened her grip on the strap of her bag, understanding that vigilance was a deliberate practice, merging survival with conscience. Dante's voice broke the silence quietly, signaling a turn. Emma realized that ethical courage demanded both action and reflection, awareness and decisiveness intertwined. They emerged briefly into a flickering corridor, walls lined with peeling paint. Emma considered that beauty and danger often coexisted, just as morality and fear coexisted in every choice. A sudden distant crash made her duck instinctively. She reminded herself that moral courage was not the absence of fear but the choice to act rightly despite it. They moved silently, aware of every echo. Emma reflected that careful observation was both a survival skill and an ethical imperative, a recognition that life demanded responsibility. Dante gestured ahead. Emma realized that adaptation under pressure was moral as well as tactical, that courage required constant reassessment of risk and principle. A faint light glimmered at the corridor's end. Emma's chest tightened, knowing that hope often required calculated patience, and moral clarity required careful judgment in moments of crisis. They navigated another sharp turn. Emma thought that courage and morality were inseparable, each decision a test of character, each step a negotiation between instinct and ethics. A distant groan made her flinch, but she pushed forward. Emma understood that action under uncertainty was an ethical exercise, requiring both deliberation and bravery. The walls constricted further. She reflected that fear sharpened both senses and conscience, that tension revealed the inner balance between instinct and principle. Dante's presence beside her was reassuring, silent yet commanding. Emma realized that trust and integrity could amplify courage, turning shared risk into moral fortitude. The tunnel opened into a small courtyard. Emma felt the release of momentary space, understanding that clarity often came after pressure, that ethical action required both courage and insight. A shadow moved across the far wall. Emma's pulse quickened, but she reminded herself that bravery meant acting rightly even when unseen forces threatened. They continued forward cautiously. Emma considered that survival alone was hollow. It was the deliberate, principled choices in fear that defined character and forged true courage. The courtyard stretched dimly before them, scattered debris illuminated by pale moonlight, and Emma realized that exposure demanded not only speed, but moral judgment in every step. Dante's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, grounding her, a reminder that trust was both tactical necessity and ethical affirmation, an acknowledgement that lives intertwined could strengthen courage. A faint murmur from above made her freeze, and she understood that vigilance was inseparable from conscience. That awareness of danger was also awareness of responsibility. The scent of damp stone filled the air, and Emma reflected that fear could sharpen perception and moral clarity simultaneously, teaching that courage required both instinct and reflection. They pressed forward into a narrower passage, the walls close enough to feel. Emma realized that confinement tested not just survival instincts but ethical decision-making under pressure. Dante's eyes darted to every corner, every shadow. Emma understood that moral courage demanded assessment before action, that calculated restraint often saved lives more than impulsive heroism. A sudden scuff from behind made her flinch, and she reminded herself that the measure of bravery wasn't continuing with clarity despite panic's grip. The air grew colder, damp seeping through cracks. Emma felt that discomfort often revealed character, and enduring it consciously was a moral exercise as well as a physical challenge. Dante paused, listening, signaling a direction. Emma realized that shared vigilance was both tactical and ethical, that protecting others required mindfulness and courage intertwined. A distant clatter echoed, raising her pulse. She reflected that every choice carried weight, that morality existed even in fleeting actions in moments of threat. The passage twisted sharply, forcing them to move single file. Emma understood that patience and observation were moral acts, a way to preserve life amid chaos. Dante moved with silent precision, and she recognized that discipline was inseparable from integrity, that skill and ethics were mutually reinforcing in dangerous times. A shadow flickered at the edge of her vision, and she inhaled sharply, reminded that courage required acknowledgement of fear and deliberate action in spite of it. They skirted around a broken doorframe, and Emma considered that survival was insufficient without ethical choices, that the right decision mattered even when unseen. The walls pressed closer, yet they continued. She reflected that restraint was a form of moral courage, that sometimes endurance was the bravest act of all. A distant drip echoed like a clock, marking time and tension. Emma understood that awareness and reflection were intertwined, that deliberate observation was a moral necessity in dangerous spaces. Dante's glance reassured her silently, a bond of trust born from shared peril. Emma realized that ethical courage often required reliance on others, that human connection amplified strength. A gust of wind carried dust across the floor, and she flinched. She reminded herself that sensitivity to detail was a survival skill, but also an ethical responsibility to act with care. They rounded another corner, emerging into faint light. Emma felt a mixture of relief and anticipation, understanding that clarity and courage were inseparable, born from pressure and reflection. A distant shadow shifted unexpectedly. Her pulse quickened, yet she remembered that fear's presence was not weakness but an invitation to conscious, principled action. The corridor narrowed, walls closing in. Emma reflected that limitations tested character, that moral and tactical courage required creativity and patience simultaneously. Dante's steady presence gave her strength. She realized that trust and awareness could merge, that shared risk allowed moral courage to flourish, even under extreme threat. A small puddle reflected dim light, reminding her that perception and reflection were vital, that even minor signs carried ethical weight in life-or-death moments. They advanced slowly, footsteps echoing softly. Emma understood that courage without thought was empty. It was intentional, principled action that defined true bravery. The tunnel curved again, obscuring vision. She realized that uncertainty sharpened both fear and ethical reasoning, that every step required awareness of consequence and moral judgment. Dante's hand brushed hers subtly, grounding her. Emma felt that connection reinforced ethical responsibility, that protection was both a tactical and moral imperative. A faint scratching sound echoed nearby. Emma inhaled, acknowledging that mindfulness and moral clarity often arose from fear, that deliberate observation preserved life. They continued with quiet focus, the air tense. Emma reflected that courage was choosing action aligned with principle, not merely surviving or reacting. The tunnel widened slightly, offering temporary reprieve. She realized that relief was fleeting, but reflection during pause strengthened both ethical insight and readiness for the next challenge. The tunnel ended abruptly, a rusted metal door barring the way, and Emma understood that obstacles demanded patience as well as courage, that ethical resolve required deliberate choices in the face of uncertainty. Dante's fingers traced the lock briefly, assessing. She realized that experience and moral judgment were inseparable, that wisdom guided both survival and principle. A sudden echo behind them made her flinch. Fear sharpened into awareness, and she knew that vigilance was a moral responsibility as much as a survival skill. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit stairwell descending further. Emma reflected that bravery was measured not by the absence of fear, but by purposeful action guided by conscience. Dante's voice was calm, instructive, and she understood that leadership fused ethics with strategy, that morality could not be separated from decisiveness under threat. Each step down felt heavier, the air thicker. Emma realized that endurance and reflection coexisted, that the ethical choice often required both patience and courage. A clatter echoed from below, and her heart raced. But she reminded herself that awareness and moral clarity could transform fear into strategic action. They reached a narrow corridor lined with crates. Emma considered that survival required observation, and moral responsibility demanded protecting others with both care and skill. A sudden movement made her grip her bag tightly. She understood that instinct and principle were intertwined, that conscious action in crisis was ethical courage. Dante gestured forward, silent, commanding without words. Emma realized that trust and moral accountability often traveled together, that reliance on others was itself an act of courage. The corridor turned sharply and a faint light flickered ahead. She reflected that even brief clarity could guide ethical decisions, that small insights were powerful in high-stakes situations. A shadow flickered at the edge of her vision, forcing her to freeze momentarily. Emma knew that vigilance and moral reflection were inseparable, that ethical action required careful observation. Dante moved like a shadow himself, alert yet composed. She realized that self-discipline was both tactical and ethical, that restraint could protect life when rash action might destroy it. The air grew colder and damper, seeping through walls. Emma considered that discomfort revealed character, teaching that ethical courage required endurance of both fear and hardship. A faint metallic scrape echoed. She paused, breathing deliberately, understanding that every decision carried moral weight, that survival was inseparable from principle in dangerous moments. Dante's hand briefly touched her back, a grounding reassurance. Emma realized that human connection reinforced ethical responsibility, that courage often demanded reliance on others. They rounded another corner into deeper darkness, the silence amplifying their senses. She reflected that awareness was both a tool and a moral duty, that observing carefully protected not only life but conscience. A sudden gust of wind stirred debris, startling her. Emma understood that fear was not weakness but a cue for ethical decision-making, that careful action could transform panic into purpose. The corridor narrowed dangerously, forcing careful steps. She considered that limitations tested character, that courage was the deliberate choice to act rightly under constraint. Dante's eyes flicked to every shadow. Emma realized that ethical courage involved calculated risk, that prudence and principle were inseparable when life hung in the balance. A distant drip echoed like a warning. She felt her heart tighten, and understood that mindfulness was a moral responsibility, that every perception could save or end a life. They moved past an overturned crate, stepping cautiously. Emma reflected that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the conscious choice to act with integrity despite it. Dante paused, scanning the ceiling. She realized that protection of others required both vigilance and moral discernment, that courage was ethical in its application, not just instinctive. A sudden squeak of metal echoed nearby. Emma froze briefly, her mind racing. She recognized that attentive observation and reflection were moral acts, guarding life through careful action. The stairwell widened into a landing, light filtering weakly from a small window. She realized that even brief clarity offered opportunity for both ethical and tactical advantage, guiding choices under threat. A whisper of movement behind them prompted her to glance back, her pulse accelerating. Emma understood that courage meant acting in alignment with principle, even when fear clawed at reason. Dante gestured forward silently, eyes sharp. She reflected that leadership required moral clarity as much as strategic insight, that ethical decisions often guided survival in ways unseen. The corridor twisted into near-total darkness. Emma considered that uncertainty demanded not just skill but conscious reflection, that bravery without moral awareness risked recklessness. They paused briefly, listening to distant echoes. Emma understood that reflection under stress was itself courageous, that awareness could prevent catastrophe when guided by principle. A faint light appeared at the end of the passage, promise and danger intertwined. She realized that courage and ethical action were inseparable, that every step forward required mindful commitment to doing what was right. The light grew stronger, revealing an old service door ahead, and Emma realized that even small openings demanded courage and clarity, that ethical judgment guided every step in peril. Dante checked the lock with practiced precision, and she understood that preparedness and morality were intertwined, that careful planning was itself an ethical act in life-threatening moments. A faint scuffle echoed behind them, and her pulse raced. Emma recognized that fear was a signal, not a weakness, and that responding with conscience and awareness defined true bravery. They pushed through the door into a cramped stairwell. She reflected that confinement revealed character, that endurance and ethical choice often came together when options seemed limited. Dante gestured silently for her to follow. Emma understood that trust was a moral act, that choosing to rely on others required courage tempered by principle. Each step down the damp staircase made her muscles ache. She considered that perseverance was not just physical but moral, that ethical resilience sustained action even under extreme stress. A distant metallic clang made her jump, and she realized that vigilance was a responsibility, that conscious attention to danger was a form of moral duty in a chaotic world. The corridor narrowed sharply, forcing careful navigation. Emma reflected that constraints tested both skill and conscience, that courage was acting rightly under pressure rather than blindly. Dante paused at an intersection, assessing the shadows. She recognized that situational awareness and ethical judgment were inseparable, that survival required both moral clarity and tactical reasoning. A muffled noise made her freeze. Emma understood that every sound carried potential consequence, that ethical courage included patience and restraint as well as swift action. They moved past a broken crate, stepping lightly. She realized that even small choices could have life or death consequences, that awareness and conscience guided each movement. Dante's eyes swept the walls, alert yet calm. Emma reflected that protective vigilance was an ethical responsibility, that defending others demanded careful attention as well as courage. A flicker of movement in the shadows made her hold her breath. She understood that fear could sharpen insight, that moral awareness turned instinct into calculated action. The stairwell opened into a narrow landing. Emma considered that perspective mattered, that ethical discernment was about seeing all angles before acting. Dante led forward, silent but authoritative. She recognized that trust and moral accountability were intertwined, that courage included reliance on those whose ethics aligned with your own. A gust of wind stirred debris in the corridor. Emma understood that danger was constant, but deliberate ethical choices could turn threat into opportunity. They descended further, the air colder and heavier. She reflected that endurance and morality were inseparable, that sustaining action in adversity required clarity of conscience. A metallic squeak echoed near the ceiling. Emma froze briefly, recognizing that careful observation was as much an ethical obligation as a survival skill. The corridor twisted again, forcing careful movement. She realized that courage was a conscious commitment, that acting rightly under stress distinguished bravery from recklessness. Dante's hand briefly brushed hers in reassurance. Emma considered that human connection reinforced moral action, that courage often required trust in another's ethics. A distant drip echoed through the stone walls. She understood that mindfulness was a protective and moral act, that every perception could guide the next correct step. They rounded a corner, shadows deepening. Emma reflected that even brief insights were valuable, that awareness and moral courage transformed fear into decisive action. A faint scuffle made her heart jump. She knew that vigilance was a moral responsibility, that conscious attention could preserve life when instinct alone might fail. The stairwell widened slightly, a small window letting in weak light. Emma realized that clarity, even fleeting, was a moral advantage, guiding ethical choices under threat. Dante signaled for caution. She reflected that ethical courage demanded both observation and patience, that restraint could be as vital as bold action. The air grew damp and musty. Emma considered that discomfort revealed character, that bravery included enduring hardship while maintaining conscience. A shadow flitted along the walls. She understood that situational awareness was inseparable from ethical responsibility, that every careful step could save lives. They approached another doorway, the end of the tunnel near. Emma felt her heartbeat accelerate, recognizing that courage involved acting rightly even when the outcome was uncertain. Dante opened the door silently, revealing a dimly lit alley. She realized that emerging into the open demanded both strategic awareness and moral discernment, that freedom required courage guided by principle. A sudden gust of wind brought the smells of the city. Emma understood that risk was constant, but conscious action informed by conscience could navigate danger successfully. Emma stood on the terrace of the Westchester estate, dawn spilling across the manicured gardens and the distant city skyline. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from months of surviving and fighting for something bigger than herself. Every heartbeat reminded her courage was moving forward despite terror. She realized the world was built on choices, silent sacrifices, and small acts of defiance that could topple empires. Every shadow she had walked through had led her here, to a place where survival and purpose intertwined. Trust was rare, and bonds forged in danger could endure anything. The lives they protected and the people who believed in her had given clarity she had never known. Living meant responsibility, and freedom came when fear no longer dictated her steps. Dante appeared behind her, quiet but powerful, his dark eyes reflecting the rising sun and the weight of the past months. The war with the Vulov family had ended, but the lessons remained permanent. Strength was measured not by surviving battles, but by using power to protect others and honor those who could no longer speak. Emma's gaze met his, and they understood they survived not only by skill, but by holding on to humanity. The city stretched below, sprawling and indifferent, yet somehow softer now, colored by their choices, their courage, and the lives they had saved. Emma inhaled the crisp morning air, and realized the truest victories were not counted in numbers or revenge, but in acting with conscience and integrity. Fear would always exist, danger would always lurk, but facing life with honor could carve light into the darkest night. She would never forget the nights she had run, the hands she had held, or the lives she had touched. Yet she discovered something enduring. Love, courage, and justice could coexist in a violent world. The choices they made, the risks they took, and the lives they saved defined them more than the wars they fought. In that quiet morning, Emma understood she was not just surviving, she was living with purpose, with strength, and with a heart brave enough to carry the memory of those lost. The sun climbed higher, casting warmth over the estate, the city, and over them both. Emma allowed herself to feel it, a rare and precious peace. Life demanded resilience, courage, and integrity, and she now knew she possessed all three. The past could not be undone, but the future was theirs to shape. She understood the ultimate truth of her journey. Surviving was never enough. Living fully, acting with honor, and protecting those who could not protect themselves was the measure of a life well lived. The darkness had tested them, but light, love, and purpose had won. and Emma finally felt the weight of fear lift as she embraced the new day, knowing they had survived and grown stronger together.